A Ukrainian reconnaissance drone holds station at 400 meters, its lens angled steeply down. Below it, a Russian main battle tank crawls along a tree line in eastern Ukraine, kicking a thin plume off dry ground. The vehicle is not under fire, nothing detonates. And yet in the upper run of the left side track, the stretch that should ride taut over the return rollers, the steel hangs slack, it dips between the wheels, it slaps down with every meter the tank covers. The operator does not strike, he films, because that sag is not cosmetic. Before any weapon enters this story, one question: what is that loose track telling us about the crew, the unit, and the entire system that put this machine on the road? Retention_checkpoint 0 o'clock hook. This is not a film about an explosion. There is no destroyed hull waiting at the end of it. What our analysts pulled from this single transit clip is something quieter and more telling. A method for reading a tank's maintenance history from above, frame by frame, the way a mechanic reads a worn tire. By the close of this investigation, you will be able to look at a moving armored vehicle and judge, with reasonable confidence, whether its crew has the time, the parts, and the discipline to keep it alive. And you will understand why a slack track, more than any burning wreck, is one of the truest maps of where the Russian army is wearing thin. Retention_checkpoint 030 resolution Ts. Start with the object. The vehicle in our clip presents as a T-72 family hull, most likely a T-72B3, the upgraded variant that has carried much of Russia's armored weight since 2022. It runs near 46 tons combat loaded. It rides on torsion bar suspension, 6 road wheels per side, a drive sprocket at the rear, an idler wheel at the front, and a set of small return rollers carrying the upper track run. Its tracks are RMSH type, rubber metal hinge, where each link pin sits in a rubber bushing rather than a bare steel joint. That detail matters, because rubber bushings age. They take a set, they harden, and they change how the whole track behaves long before any human eye would call the machine broken. Here is the principle the entire investigation rests on. A tracked vehicle's running gear is the one subsystem a crew cannot fake and cannot hide. You can repaint a turret, you can tow a dead engine out of frame, but track tension is set by hand, with tools, on a stationary vehicle, by people who have to lie under the hull to do it. The state of that track is a direct, unfalsifiable record of how much attention the machine has received, and how recently. When the upper run sags and slaps, you are not looking at a design flaw. You are looking at a task that did not get done. Why would it not get done? That is where the strategic picture enters. By 2026, after years of grinding positional warfare across the Donbas and Zaporizhia fronts, the defining fact of Russia's armored force is not loss in battle alone, it is the cost of keeping survivors running. Western trackers, Oryx chief among them, have visually confirmed thousands of Russian armored vehicles destroyed, damaged, abandoned, or captured since February 2022, each entry backed by a photograph or video. But Oryx counts the dead. What it cannot count from a single image is the far larger population of vehicles still moving while quietly falling apart. That population is what a sagging track lets us glimpse. Proper track tension should produce a specific silhouette. On a T-72 in good order, the upper run rides almost flat across the return rollers, with only a slight, even controlled dip between them. The track should not bottom out against the road wheel tops. It should not visibly oscillate as the vehicle moves at speed. When you watch a well-maintained tank in transit, the upper run looks almost rigid, a taut belt, not a hanging chain. That is the baseline. Everything our read depends on is measured against that baseline. So watch what the clip actually shows. Across the 4 minutes and 38 seconds our team cataloged, that runtime is the clip's own length, not a claim about any external event. The left side upper run does not ride flat. It bows downward between the forward return rollers, deepening as the tank accelerates out of a turn. At roughly the 2-minute mark in the footage, as the hull crosses a shallow rut, the slack run drops far enough to contact a road wheel top, and bounces back up. That bounce is the slap. And the slap is the first of several details we will return to, because on its own it can be read more than one way. I spent hours going back through frame grabs of this clip, and one thing kept nagging at me. The right side track did not behave the same way. Its upper run sat tighter. That asymmetry is a genuine clue, not noise. Track tension on a T-72 is adjusted independently per side, through an idler wheel crank mechanism at the front of each track. If one side sags and the other holds, the simplest explanation is that one side's tension was set, and the other was not. A crew that retensions one track and leaves before finishing the second is a crew working against a clock. Retention_checkpoint, 4 o'clock stakes bend. But here we hit the first real obstacle, and an honest investigation has to name it. A single drone frame is a terrible witness. The camera looks down at an angle, foreshortening the side of the hull. Lens distortion bends straight lines. A vehicle climbing a slope will show false slack as the track conforms to ground it has not yet reached. Heat shimmer over warm soil smears edges in thermal feeds. Read one frozen frame and you can convince yourself of almost anything. The way around it is not cleverness, it is repetition. Our analysts do not read the dip in one frame, we track it across dozens, watching whether the slack persists through level ground, through turns, through changes in speed. Slack that survives all of those is structural. Slack that appears only on a slope is geometry, and we throw it out. There is a second obstacle, and it is the one that separates careful analysis from a comfortable conclusion. Some loose track is deliberate. Crews operating in deep mud, the Rasputitsa, the seasonal thaw that has swallowed Russian columns since the first weeks of the war, sometimes run their tracks slightly loosened on purpose, because packed mud between the links acts like extra tension and a too tight track will snap or throw under that load. So a sag in spring, on a muddy approach, is not automatically neglect. The terrain in our clip works against that excuse. Dry ground, a hard track, dust rather than mud. On this surface, a tank should be tensioned up. The slack is not the mud talking. The distinction matters, because it is the difference between a crew adapting and a crew that has run out of road. The investigation was, at this point, simple. A tank with a loose track on dry ground, one side set and one side not. Case nearly closed on a tired crew. Then we looked harder at the road wheels and found something that reframed the whole vehicle. Retention_checkpoint 730 microfinal #1. On a T72, the 6 road wheels per side are identical castings, fitted with rubber tires bonded to the rim. They are supposed to match, same pattern, same wear, same color of grime. In our clip, the third road wheel on the left side is different. It is a lighter shade, its hub pattern subtly off from its neighbors, and its rubber rim looks newer and cleaner than the worn wheels around it. A single mismatched road wheel has one overwhelmingly likely cause, and it is not a factory variation. It is cannibalization. Somewhere, a dead or stripped T72 gave up that wheel, and a crew or a field workshop bolted it onto this one because the supply system could not deliver a fresh part. This is the most revealing detail in the whole read. A mismatched road wheel is not the crew's failure. It is improvisation, mechanics keeping a machine alive, with whatever the battlefield gives up. Oryx and other trackers have documented this pattern for years. Russian vehicles wearing parts visibly scavenged from others, photographed in repair yards and in the field. The slack track says the crew is out of time. The mismatched wheel says the system behind them is out of parts. Together they describe a vehicle being held together past the point where a healthy logistics tether would have pulled it off the line. Most people assume armored attrition is mostly about ammunition, the FPV drone, the artillery round, the mine. The evidence tells a quieter story. A very large share of Russian vehicle losses across the war have been recorded not as destroyed, but as abandoned or captured, machines left because they broke down, bog in, through a track, or simply could not be recovered under fire. The famous example is the stalled column northwest of Kyiv in late February and March 2022, the line of vehicles satellite imaged by Maxar stretching roughly 64 kilometers. Western analysis at the time attributed its collapse less to Ukrainian fire than to fuel shortages, cheap and rotted tires on support trucks, mud, and exactly the kind of unperformed maintenance our clip displays in miniature. The column did not mostly burn, it mostly stopped. Looking at the slack track and the borrowed wheel together, one thing stands out. The single most decisive weapon against an armored force may not be a weapon at all. It is the maintenance schedule it cannot keep. A tank that is never serviced does not need to be hit. It throws a track in a turn, it grenades a final drive, it cooks an engine, and it dies on a roadmap nobody is shooting at. The drone in our clip is a diagnostician, not a hunter. Its diagnosis is harder to dispute than any battle damage claim, because nobody staged it. Retention_checkpoint, approximately 11 o'clock authorial opinion Lars. What does the slap actually mean, that drop and bounce of the upper run we flagged early? This is the detail we held back, and now it pays off. A track that slaps the road wheels under motion is doing two destructive things at once. First, it is hammering the return rollers and the road wheel rubber with impact loads they were never meant to take, accelerating their wear in a feedback loop. Looser track, harder slap, faster wear, looser still. Second and more dangerous, a slapping upper run is one sharp turn away from jumping the sprocket teeth or the idler and shedding entirely. That is a thrown track. In combat, a thrown track immobilizes the vehicle in the open in the time it takes to read this sentence. The slap is not a symptom. It is a countdown. Put yourself in that crew's position for a moment. It is the 4th or 5th straight day of movement orders. The vehicle commander knows the left track needs tensioning. He also knows that tensioning it correctly means stopping in the open, getting under the hull with the idler crank, and spending 20 exposed minutes in a sector where a loitering drone, like the one filming him, turns any stationary vehicle into a target within minutes. So he runs it loose. He gambles the slow death of the running gear against the fast death of standing still. That is not negligence in the lazy sense. It is a rational bet, forced by a system that has left him no safe window to do his job. What would you have chosen, with a drone in the sky and a maintenance task that pins you to the ground? Regimental_checkpoint, approximately 13 o'clock viewer question. This is also where we will say the thing that probably draws fire. The common framing treats footage like this as proof of Russian crews being careless or poorly trained. We think that framing is largely wrong, and it lets the real failure off the hook. The crews in these clips are, by and large, doing the only sane thing available to them. The failure sits higher, in a logistics and maintenance system that cannot deliver road wheels, cannot rotate units off the line to service them, and cannot create a battlefield safe enough for 20 minutes of work under a hull. Blaming the crew for a slack track is like blaming a driver for a flat when nobody will sell him a tire. The slack track indicts the rear, not the man under the drone. Retention_checkpoint, approximately 1430 controversial take plus microfinal #2, which raises the next question, and the one that consumed most of our verification effort. Did this specific tank actually break, or did it make it home? Here the investigation hit its hardest wall. We had the transit clip. We did not have a follow-on. The drone that filmed this vehicle either lost it behind the tree line, broke off for another tasking, or simply ran its battery down. Reconnaissance feeds end for mundane reasons far more often than dramatic ones. There is no second clip in our holdings showing this hull thrown, stuck, or struck, and that gap is important to state plainly, because the temptation in OSINT work is to close every loop with a satisfying ending. The honest position is that we do not know what happened to this individual tank. The read tells us its probability of mechanical failure was elevated and rising. It does not tell us the outcome. Anyone who claims otherwise from this footage is selling certainty the evidence cannot back. There is a Russian side counter to all of this, and a serious investigation has to put it on the table. Pro-Russian military telegram channels have, throughout the war, argued that slack tracks and improvised parts in such clips are signs of pragmatic field adaptation, not collapse, a force that fights worn and keeps moving rather than one that pulls back to polish its equipment. One unverified Russian claim circulated alongside footage of this general type asserted that affected vehicles were undergoing planned regrouping and would be serviced in the rear within the day. We treat that as what it is, an unverified claim, with no independent confirmation, no imagery of the servicing, and an obvious incentive behind it. But we note it, because the OSINT discipline is to record the contested version, not to erase it. The point is not that the Russian framing is automatically false. It is that it is unproven, and the physical evidence in the frame does not need it. The strongest independent corroboration for the neglect read does not come from any single clip. It comes from the aggregate. Over years, the same details recur across thousands of images. Under-tensioned tracks, mismatched and scavenged road wheels, thrown links, and vehicles abandoned intact on dry roads with no visible battle damage. The UK Ministry of Defence in its public intelligence updates has repeatedly assessed Russian armoured serviceability and recovery as persistent weak points, with significant numbers of losses attributable to mechanical failure and the inability to retrieve broken vehicles under fire. Defense analysts at outlets like Jane's have made the same structural point. No one of these sources proves what happened to our tank. Together they establish the pattern our tank fits, and a single data point inside a heavily documented pattern is far harder to dismiss than a lone anomaly. Retention_checkpoint, approximately 1730 mid-roll layer, Tanapul. There is a line in the engineering side of this that has stuck with me since we started cataloging these clips. The RMSH track, the rubber-bushed kind on our tank, is genuinely a good design when it is maintained. The rubber dampens shock, quiets the run, and extends pin life, but it has a failure mode that reads almost like a moral. When the bushings are neglected and the track is run slack, the rubber that was meant to protect the joint instead breaks down faster under the slapping load, and the whole track loosens further as it wears. The very feature that should have made the system more durable accelerates its decline once the discipline behind it lapses. The track does not just record neglect. Under neglect, it actively conspires in its own destruction. So how do you actually run this read at home, if you wanted to? You start by establishing the baseline silhouette of a tensioned upper run, flat, even, minimal controlled dip. You watch the suspect run across multiple frames and multiple ground conditions, discarding any slack that appears only on slopes or in obvious mud. You check side-to-side symmetry, because uneven tension points to interrupted servicing. You scan the road wheels for mismatches in pattern, shade, and rim wear, which flag cannibalization. You listen, where audio exists, for the slap. And then, this is the part most people skip, you stop short of a verdict. The read gives you a probability of a maintenance-stressed vehicle on a logistics-stressed line. It does not give you a fate. The discipline is knowing where the evidence stops. We cut one strand from this episode for length, a parallel read on the drive sprocket teeth and the final drive housing, where wear and fluid staining tell their own maintenance story, and where some of the most reliable failure predictions actually live. If you want that breakdown as its own piece, say so in the comments, because there is a full investigation in the rear running gear alone, and it is arguably a cleaner signal than the track. Attrition_checkpoint, approximately 21 o'clock engagement hook plus microfinal #3. Before we close, the loops we left open. The slap, explained, an impact and wear feedback loop that ends, eventually, in a thrown track. The asymmetry between left and right, one side tensioned, one side not, the signature of a crew interrupted before finishing. The mismatched road wheel, cannibalization, a part borrowed from a dead machine because the supply chain could not deliver a new one. The Russian claim of planned regrouping, noted, unverified, unsupported by any imagery, and the fate of this one tank, honestly unresolved, because the footage ends where it ends, and we will not invent an ending the evidence did not give us. What a slack track says, in the end, is not about one tank. It is about the distance between a force's official self-portrait, maintained, mobile, ready, and the forensic reality you can read from 400 meters up. The picture says nothing is wrong. The metal says the crew has no time, the system has no parts, and the machine is being run past the point where care could save it. You do not need an explosion to see an army wearing out. You need a loose track, a borrowed wheel, and the patience to read them. If you want the rear running gear breakdown next, it is waiting. Subscribe and it finds you. The drone caught the symptom. The diagnosis is the whole war.